We're looking at self-parenting today, and the reference books that we're using, in particular, Scattered Minds, or Scattered, depending on what country you live in, by Dr. Gabor Mate, and we're going to be referencing some of that as well during this one today. And I love that quote: "Knowing oneself comes from attending with compassionate curiosity to what is happening within." Gabor Mate is brilliant when it comes to understanding the mind body, the way the brain works. As a medical doctor, he has that understanding, but he also has such a specialty in it through his years of work and through his work of compassionate inquiry as well. Parents are the single greatest influence children will experience in their lives. And I loved it when I read this because it just feels so true. And it's something that I had never really probably thought about in quite that way. One of those things that we know, but we might not be thinking about that much. And the next part that he says, whatever the intentions of the parent, the child does not experience the parent directly, the child experiences the parenting. That's a profound statement. And it reminds me of something that a friend of mine said to me recently about, it's not enough for me to just send good thoughts or feel connected internally to my friend or child. I need to actually reach out and text them and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about you," or whatever that might be, whatever connection we might have. So our own internal experience as a person, as a child who was parented, as a parent, perhaps, or a grandparent, but certainly as a more resourced adult for our own younger self, the intention of wanting to have a closer connection with our own inner child or our younger self has to be followed up with action. And this example is just a really common example. One of us, a parent or anybody really, is absorbed in something that's happening somewhere else, and we're not really connecting. And the other person, whether it's a child or a friend or anybody else, a partner, we just feel like they're not really paying attention to us. And then what do we believe based on that? And that's for children, that's really the core deficiency beliefs. I'm not worthy, I'm not safe, nobody really cares about me. It's devastating for a child. So as we become adults ourselves, and I think particularly for me, when I became a parent of a bit older child, and I could look back a little bit on it and I went, wow, I can really see the context of my parents' behavior and the way they were with us. I can fit it into a social time. It was after the war. Parents were Everybody was kind of trying to forget what had happened and create these nuclear families and the suburban life. And that was what was happening with my parents. So I wasn't experiencing that. I was experiencing the effects of that. But even if we can understand intergenerational trauma and have a lot of compassion and understanding for what was it like for them. One of the things I was talking about with my sister yesterday was she was just wondering what was it like for our parents when World War II started. And, in the context of what's happening with the Ukraine in particular. But what would it have been like for them? They were teenagers at the time. And it's interesting to look back and kind of put that into a context. And how did we form these beliefs that we have? So, this is also from Gabor Mate from the book Scattered Mind. Even that perspective granted view of events is not enough to erase the layers of beliefs about ourselves and the world around us that parenting implanted in the first place. So that's something, again, he's kind of talking to what we already know. And I think it's helpful to bring that up into awareness, just to see that. So a good enough parent knows that a child is a life in development with needs dictated by the future as much as by the present. I remember when my granddaughter was So 4 or 5 years old, my son and daughter-in-law put her into dance class, and one of the things they said was, "She's kinda shy, so this would be good for her." I'm just like, "Wow." I hadn't really thought about it in that context to really pay attention. What is my child like? What are their strengths? What could they use some help with? And then see if you could provide that. And she's not shy at all now. So maybe it worked, maybe it wasn't that, who knows? But just to look at that. And so this what we're looking at today, we're also looking at it through the lens of parenting ourselves. So if we consider that our own healing journey is a kind of like a life in development, and what is it that we need to strengthen so that we can be more present in our life, we can have a more enjoyable future, as well, of course, as a more enjoyable right now. So, one of the things we know about children, and this is something that all of us are doing, is that we're regulating our own nervous systems. We're learning to work with our breath. We're taking those deep breaths. We're regulating our nervous system. And when we're doing that with other people, with children or other adults, there's a co regulating effect, but we can also co regulate with our own younger self, and we can make a repair where there's a breach. So if we've spent our whole life pushing down or pushing away things that were painful experiences or feelings, it doesn't mean that we have to continue to do that. We can make a connection and repair that breach. So let's just sit for a moment and let that take up some space. So those first several slides were really to set the tone for what's going to happen now. And again, this is from Gabor Mate's book, Scattered Minds. And what he's done is he's talked about kind of the three pillars of the body, the psychological and the spiritual. And he's talking about specifically about ADHD or ADD adults. But I think these can widely apply maybe in a different sense in terms of how our brain works. That the effect of trauma on our brain has a lot of similarities with ADD, an ADD person with ADD in their brain. So I think probably most of these will apply to us as well. And when I'm bringing these forward, so there's 9 of these areas that he suggests that we could work in. And it's not to feel like, oh my gosh, I have a messy room. I'm looking at my dishes right now, or I have this or that, sleep and different things. It's really just to see these are some of the elements or influences on how we are right now. So these are some of the things that we could work with. So the first one is that, especially with ADD, people are very sensitive to their environment, and it can either harmonize or disorganize the mind. Sleep is something that we've all talked about a lot, and that it's related, in my view, a lot of it is related to separation anxiety, the fear of being alone with one's mind. And we need sleep for lots of reasons. Our body needs it, but also we need it to integrate the events from when we're awake and to regenerate the neurological processes. A lot goes on in our brain and our nervous system when we sleep. And one of the unfortunate effects of trauma is that we often have very dysregulated sleep. So that's something that we could decide to parent ourselves around, is working with sleep. Nutrition, served in an atmosphere free of tension. That's a big part of Ayurveda and yoga meditation when we work at stabilizing our life in order to have a better base for meditation and spiritual depth. So, nutritious, attractive meals served in an atmosphere free of tension. And so maybe this is a one of those low-hanging fruits for many of us. Instead of eating at our desk, we could make a bit nicer environment. I have a place outside that I could go sit. And now that it's getting warmer, I'm doing that more often. I also eat at my desk a lot. And then physical exercise and relaxation. So this is for our physical health, obviously, but we all know that we feel better when we go for walks or when we do yoga. We release tension out of our body. And yoga in particular is really helpful for this. And then nature. One of the things he talked about in the book was how a native elder had recommended to sit down in a meadow and gaze at 1 yard or 1 meter square for a whole hour. And this picture with the crocuses in the spring is from where I used to live in southern Alberta. And it was native prairie. So it had never been plowed or seeded with anything. And there were hundreds of different things in 1 yard of that. And I didn't know about this exercise, but I would often sit there and just really look and see. And there was little bugs and things that were going on in there too, the different types of grasses and flowers. And it was really interesting. So as a practice, that might be something that as a busy adult, we're a bit out of touch with. And then, of course, letting go of some things if we're too busy. This book was obviously written before COVID. I think a lot of us have experienced what it's like to be a little less busy in terms of social activity anyway. So just to see, just kind of look and see, is there something I'm doing that feels more like a duty than a joy? And maybe if there's not enough, then to bring some in. Recreation, things that nourish the mind and the body. So, I go for walks regularly here. We might go for a walk in the city or something, but sometimes it's nice to drive out to the country and walk in the country or wherever it is that you are. Creative expression, I picked this partly because Lizzo's really cool, but also I play the flute too. And I've really missed not being able to be in a band with other people. So I'm looking for other ways of creative expression. I think that's something that we often feel a little shy about or stilted about. Well, I'm not very good. That creative expression is something that we could all move towards. And, Ernest does a lot of the mandala drawing, and there's lots of ways that we can express ourselves. And then, of course, we come to meditation and mindfulness, which is a big foundation of what we do here. And the exercises and practices that we can do to remember that we're more than just our daily life and we're more than just the thoughts in our mind, and the practices that we do and the daily practices and other times to really come back into connection with all of ourselves, all of our layers of being, to come into connection with all of creation. So those are some elements that Gabor Mate has spoken about and has suggested that these are things that we could work with that are, pretty practical. So our physical space, our sleep, nutrition, and exercise being ways that we can work with our body as well as our psychological, and getting into nature, the kinds of things we do for fun and for spiritual connection. So this is where we're gonna sit for a little bit here. And as we were parented, and as we're looking at this picture here, is somebody had put that on Facebook of a number of movie stars with their older self kind of hanging out with their younger self. And Tom Hanks is an actor that I've enjoyed for a long time, and so I thought this would be an interesting picture. But really, what we're looking at here is as a resourced adult, and not as a perfectly resourced adult, but as a more resourced adult. Let's take a few minutes here and just kind of look into some of these questions. So you're welcome to journal about them, or you can just close your eyes and I will say them slowly. And these are some questions that you could also look at later. You could come back to. Sometimes it's good to spend, you know, 10 or 15 minutes with each of those or longer to come back to them at other times as well. But what would you change about the way that you were parented? And what were some things you would remove and some things that that you would add? And what do you really appreciate about that? And so things that we would remove or add, relate probably more to neglect or abuse. And again, it might not have been intentional in any way. It might have been that your parents were overwhelmed or in really difficult circumstances. We look at that. What would you change? What did you enjoy? What did you really wish was not there? Or what would you add? Like maybe more money so you could go to Disneyland, or more connection, a parent who wasn't as stressed so that they had more time for you. Let's take about 2 or 3 minutes to consider those questions. The last two questions we're going to work with a little bit more on the next page as well. But if it's coming up, what guidance would you give your younger self now? And in what ways have you already healed from your childhood? So that might be coming in as well. So, I would really want to add a feeling of being safe in my home. And now I've created a home where I really do feel safe. You could let yourself kind of move amongst those questions, see where you go. And as always, notice what's happening in your body and your breath as you're considering these and reflecting on them. What would you change? What would you add or remove? What do you appreciate? This is where we'll really spend a little bit longer. So, if you have a picture of yourself as a child, you could look at that, bring it up and look at it. Or you could have a mental picture. Oftentimes, we'll remember school pictures or different things. We remember what we look like at a certain age. And of course, there's a lot of ages to pick from. So, just let yourself, if you don't already have a picture and an age in mind, let yourself kind of settle into that. And I'm going to go through these questions very slowly. And if you want to kind of read ahead and look at them, of course, feel free to do that. I'll leave this slide up as we do this. So look at the picture. Now, what do you know about the child from that picture? There's a picture of me at age 10 in front of a friend's house. And as you're looking at the picture, you might notice the expression on their face. What do you know about them? What do you remember about what life was like at that time? And because this can be a bit intense, remember tapping. If it gets too intense and you want to just lighten the intensity a bit, tap on your forehead, open your eyes, put the image in a frame if something's coming up, breathe. So use all those tools. What do you know about this child? And what would you like them to know about you now? So, it might be something like, it was really tough. I remember what it was like to go to bed scared every night. And now I have a safe home. or whatever that might be. Things that they wouldn't have known at that time. And if you could develop a relationship with them, just kind of pretending maybe that you could be sitting with them, or maybe you're outside in the lawn or whatever. But what would they want you to know about their life as it was then, as they were experiencing their life then? What would they want you to know about that? If you had a trusted adult at the time, what would you want them to know? And it might be something painful, it might be something joyful. They might want to share a toy or a book or something with you, or so it doesn't have to necessarily be the painful things, it might be something else. Just let them, as you're doing this, kind of let them set the tone. What would they like you to know about them? Continue to notice your body, your breath. If your mind is wandering off somewhere, notice that too. You might want to bring it back, you might not. It's okay either way. And then as we're thinking back to that list, some of the things like sleep and food and exercise and spiritual nature. So I'm going to go back to those two slides too. What is one thing that you might be able to work with? Physical space, sleep, nutrition, and exercise, nature, extracurricular, the ways we have fun, creativity, recreation, meditation. And choose one that seems like it could be either really important to work on or maybe relatively easy to make some changes in. We're not looking for perfection. And then once you have one that you could work with, bring it really vividly to mind. So if you're helping them with sleep, for instance, a lot of people, I didn't have this as a child. I had a safe environment to sleep in as a child. So this is not my personal experience, but I know it is for many people. And then we develop problems with sleep later on. So perhaps you are working with, how could I bring a lot of things together? Maybe some relaxation before bed, maybe getting out in nature more. But how could I bring my wisdom now as an adult into helping relax a hypervigilance that protects or prevents me from sleeping? And then to really bring that into a vivid experience: sight, sound, smell, touch. But maybe you never had anyone that helped you get ready for bed. And now you can imagine maybe helping this child get ready for bed, washing their face, brushing teeth, reading a book, cuddling up beside them on the bed, reading a book. And bring yourself into that experience for a while, like a minute or two. So you're experiencing this connection with them, and they're experiencing you being very present for them. Attuned, empathetic parenting. And stay as present as you can. There might be emotion come up or thoughts. You might pause for a moment and work with that and then come back in. What would that feel like? What would be the sights, smells, sounds, tastes, touch? What would it feel like if you were that age and you had experienced that? Let yourself feel into that. And notice any ease in this, or notice if there's a difficulty in connecting. So we really can't expect that all of a sudden it will happen perfectly. There will be a magical connection. Sometimes that happens, and more often there's a hesitance. If you weren't used to having that kind of a connection at the time, then it's not something that your neural networks are set up for. It might take a little time to kind of ease into it, to trust it. And maybe you did have that, and then that parent died or moved away, or something happened to disrupt that. For another minute or so, just kind of really feel into that. Let yourself feel and experience attuned empathy. And we're going to wrap this up in a moment. But before we do, consider what kind of a commitment you might be able to make that you're pretty sure that you can keep. So it might be once a week for 15 minutes. I'm going to sit down and spend time, do this exercise again, or just kind of connect, see what's happening there. What could you commit to and then make the commitment to them, to your younger self. And it could be a wide variety. It could be that you're going to sit and do a kind of an inquiry connection practice. It might be, gosh, I remember what it was like at that age to ride my bike. It was so exhilarating. So maybe you could make a commitment to ride your bike once a week. Could be a lot of different things. Let's take another minute or so with that and let them know your commitment. And then finish off the inquiry. Put your hand on your heart if you want, or hold your own hands, or just become attuned into your body as it is right now. Look back at that image, and then we'll come back to the group.